An important part of running a land surveying business is evaluating potential clients. So you want to know if you got a good client or a bad client. That's something we work really hard to do here at Redefine Horizons. We're getting better at it. I wasn't very good at it when I started, but we're getting better at it. One type of client that we have to regularly evaluate is civil engineers. So we get a couple times a month, probably, we get called by civil engineering companies to work as a survey sub. Most of those folks we don't know. So they're usually a civil engineering company from outside of the area that's coming in to do a project in our area. So we'll get called to serve as a sub consultant to the civil engineer. One of the things that we've learned over the last 5 years is civil engineers tend not to be our best clients. They tend to not be very good clients. And I think there's some different reasons for that. Maybe I'll talk about that in another video. But as a general rule, they are not our best clients. They do not fall into that category. And so one of the things that we try and do is we try and look for some warning signs, during the early engagement with a civil engineer that they might not be a great client. Because if we can determine that, then we don't want to start a relationship. We don't want to take on a project. And every time we ignore those warning signs and decide to take on a project, we usually regret it. And it just happened to us just this last summer. I took a project from a new civil. There were some warning signs I didn't pay attention to, and we ended up very dissatisfied with how the relationship went. I ended up not getting paid for some of the work that we did. So what we try and do is look for 3 common red flags or 3 strikes that indicate that you, as a civil engineer, may not be a good client. Now, as a side note here, I want you to know I'm not trying to. This is not a hater video. Now I'm giving some honest feedback, but the real purpose of this the purpose of the video is twofold. One is to help surveyors do a better job of choosing the civil engineers that they work for. I want to share some of what I've learned, and then 2 is for the civil engineers that are listening to help them be better clients, because we want you civil engineers to be better clients. We don't want you to be bad clients, and so I'm going to call out some bad behavior here that we see from civil engineers on a fairly regular basis, and don't do those things. Like don't do the 3 things I'm going to talk about. Be a better client. Okay, so what are the 3 things? Strike number 1. So here's the first warning sign. You wait until the last minute to ask me for a proposal. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens a lot. More than 75% of the time, we will get a call from a civil engineer, and they frequently say something like, "Can we get your proposal tomorrow?" Now, in a lot of these cases, I know the civil engineer has had days or weeks, sometimes even months, to get their proposal together. And for whatever reason, they wait till the last minute to call me. Now, I'm not going to say there isn't ever, that isn't ever acceptable. Sometimes it is. I think those instances are rare. And when you call as a civil engineer and ask me for a last minute proposal, that is a red flag. That's your first strike. Why? Why does that concern me? Well, it tells me a few things. Number 1, it tells me you're probably disorganized. Disorganized clients are more difficult to manage, and they cost more money. Doing work for disorganized clients costs more money. The second thing it tells me is the client that you're going to do the work for might not be a priority to you, and that's why you waited till the last minute. And I don't want to do work for you for a client that isn't your priority, because that's probably going to leave both the client and my company dissatisfied with you. So I don't want to do that. It could also be that maybe you do like the client. Maybe the client is a priority, but this particular project isn't a priority. So maybe it's too small or not the type of work you like to do. And maybe that's why you waited to the last minute. Or it could be that the client and the project are a priority and the survey is just an afterthought. It's just a survey, right? How important is it? And that's really disturbing, right? And a lot of civil engineers, I think, take that attitude. It's like one survey is as good as any other survey. All those guys use the same tools. It's not that big of a deal. You just, You make a few phone calls the day before your proposal's due, and you get a price. So that's the first strike. Now, I'm not saying if you're a civil engineer and you call that we won't prepare a last-minute proposal, but that is the first red flag that we're looking at. Okay, here's strike number 2. If you're a civil engineer and you're asking me for a proposal, if you call me for a proposal and you're unclear about the mapping limits. So typically, we need a sketch or a polyline or a polygon in a CAD file or a KML file, KMZ file for Google Earth, or we need some indication of what the mapping limits are going to be. If you don't have that when you call to ask me for a proposal, that worries me. That's a strike. It's a red flag. Why? Why does it worry me? The first reason is it tells me that you haven't carefully considered as a designer what you need for me to do a good design. And that worries me. You know, I want to work for civil engineers that are providing a good design to the client. I don't want to work for civil engineers that are providing a bad design. If you don't know what your mapping limits are, you haven't put very much thought into what you're going to need from me to be successful as a designer. Good surveyor is critical to a good design, and I want to know that I'm working for a civil engineer that's put some thought into that. The second reason it worries me, if you don't know, have an idea of what your mapping limits are, is that means you're probably going to ask me to do extra, and you're not going to want to pay for it. And I tell civil engineers, you know, it's always cheaper for me to get data while I'm already on the site. If you start asking me to make return trips to pick up a few points over here, to tie in those couple of features over there, that starts to get really expensive for me, and I get really cranky. So I worry if you don't have a good idea what the mapping limits are, that there's going to be return trips like that, and you're not going to want to pay me for it. And then the other reason this concerns me is if you don't have a clear idea what the mapping limits are, you're probably not thinking about a fair way to balance the risk between your company and my company. Unclear mapping limits create uncertainty and risk, and almost always when I'm working for the civil engineer expects me to just eat the costs of misunderstandings about the mapping limits. And that's not a good client. Good clients don't do that. Good clients understand they have to share risk with their subconsultants, right? So now, I'm not saying that you can't call me and have a conversation about what the mapping limit should be. That's okay. A good surveyor is going to work with you to develop appropriate mapping limits. But if you call me and you just haven't thought about it, or you don't care, yeah, that's a red flag, right? And I'll give you an example. A lot of times, civil engineers will have a rough idea of what they need for mapping limits. They'll say, you know, give us everything at this intersection, but you know, how far do they need me to go outside of the intersection to do a good design? You know, typically I need to go to at least the next high or low point. Maybe there's other, you know, sidewalks or other features, valley gutters or things that we need to tie into that's going to be a conform line. I'm surprised at how often I get a call from civil engineer and they haven't thought about that. So that's a red flag. Have an idea of what you need mapped, or be prepared to have a conversation with me about it. Third strike. When you ask for my survey proposal, you tell me you want a bid. Oh man, that is the worst strike. I will almost not work for you for that one sin. Certainly, if you do all three of these things, we're probably not going to work for you. But even if you do good on the first two, if you ask me for a bid, I'm probably not going to work for you. Why is that? Why do I not like it when civil engineers ask me for a bid? There's 4 reasons. One is that means you probably treat surveyors like contractors instead of professional service providers. And I'm not a contractor. I don't provide warranties. I don't provide unit costs as a general rule. I am a licensed professional, and I help my clients manage risk, but I don't guarantee results. And so if you ask me for a bid, that tells me that to you, civil engineer, I'm no different than the guy pouring the concrete or the guy doing the framing on the job. And so that's a problem. The other thing it tells me is you're probably not even going to read my proposal. You only care about one thing. You only care about one part of that proposal, and that is the total price. And that's what you're going to look at. And if I'm not the lowest, I'm not going to get the work. You don't care about my approach. You don't care about how my approach might save money down later on in the design process or save money during construction. You don't care about the type of innovation that we're trying to do. All you care about is that bottom line number. The other thing it indicates to me is that you may ask me to cut corners because that's what people do to win low bid work. They cut corners. I don't like to cut corners. That's not the business model I run. It's not the way I like to do business. Not the way my partners like to do business. And then the fourth reason it's a strike or a red flag is that tells me, if you're asking me for a bid, that you've probably asked at least 2 other companies to give you a price for the same survey. Maybe you've asked 5. Maybe you've asked 10. I know you're getting more than one price. I'm not going to say that ever isn't okay, but if I'm going to be in a situation like that where I'm competing for work based on price, I want to know who the other players are, and I want to know what the selection criteria is. And yeah, it doesn't give me a warm fuzzy. And here's what I don't understand about civil engineers: they don't like to be treated that way. They don't like to have they don't like to be treated like contractors, and they don't like to have their services selected on low bid. So they'll complain about those things. Then they'll turn around and do the very thing they complained about. They'll do it to their survey sub. And so I just don't understand that. So as a general rule, if you ask me for a bid on a survey, I'm going to tell you we are probably not the right company for you, that you probably need to look elsewhere. So don't be the civil engineer. Please be a good client if you're a civil engineer. When you call, understand what your mapping limits are. Don't ask me for a bid. Don't ask me for the lowest price. Be prepared to have a conversation with me about what you really need, what you're trying to do. And don't wait till the last minute. Give me some advance notice. Give me some time to understand the project needs and you and your client and your role in the project and how I can help. So don't make those 3 mistakes when you're not just me. If you're any surveyor, be a good client as a civil engineer, and don't do those 3 things. Show a little class, civils. Treat me like a professional. Treat me the way you want to be treated. Now, there are other ways to strike out during the proposal process as a civil engineer. I just gave you my big 3. Give you my big 3. We'll do some other videos where we talk about some of the other things you can do during the proposal process, civil engineers, to indicate to me that you might not be a good client. It's in your interest as a civil engineer to get good surveyors to come to work for you, right? So hopefully this video helps you, avoid some mistakes early on in the relationship that indicate to me that you aren't going to be a good client, because I want to work for good clients.